Hey everybody, it is 1:29 in the PM, and you've tuned into The Last Page with Tim Page, and I am your host, Tim Page. And today I want to talk about, it's in the news lately, and I think right now, as we speak in the United States, are having a UFO hearing, I guess congressional hearing, and apparently there's been a whistleblower who is basically saying that the U.S. government military are in possession of non-human spacecraft, including non-human life forms or biologics. And so I wanted to talk about that because there's some people that say this is a Psyop, that it's a distraction, and also, for years there's been, a whole group of ufologists who say that the government has been in contact with aliens and has had UFO alien spacecraft, and they've been covering it up and been wanting to do, so people have been pushing for disclosure. So, and then of course there's the extra-dimensional or interdimensional theory. And so I wanted to look at those aspects and how I think that it can be a mixture of both. And so that's what I want this episode to be about. So I hope you enjoy this episode. And to start off, I'll just give you a brief rundown of this news of what's been going on and why this is in the news as of late. And basically, this fellow named David Grush, who apparently is a whistleblower, and this is from Wikipedia, which you can't always trust. It's not the most solid thing. Like, they have very biased reporting, but for basic things, it can be a little bit worthwhile. Okay. In June 2023, now this is the thing of David Grush, if I'm pronouncing it right, a supposed UFO whistleblower. In June 2023, United States Air Force officer and former intelligence official David Grush publicly claimed that unnamed officials told him that the U.S. federal government maintains a highly secretive UFO, or UAP, recovery program and is in possession of non-human spacecraft and dead pilots. In 2022, Grush filed a whistleblower complaint with the U.S. Office of the Intelligence Community Inspector General to support his plan to share classified information with the U.S. Senate Select Committee of Intelligence. He also filed a complaint alleging retaliation by his superiors over a similar complaint he made in 2021. Grush asserts individuals with whom he conversed shared the concern that American citizens have been killed as part of the government's efforts to cover up the information. In response to his June 2023 claims, both the National Astronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, and the U.S. Department of Defense, DoD, issued statements saying, respectively, that there is no evidence of extraterrestrial life and there is no verifiable information about the possession and reverse engineering of any extraterrestrial materials. During a congressional hearing in July 26, 2023, that's last week as of this recording, under the House Committee on Oversight and Accountability, Grush repeated his claims alongside testimony from U.S. fighter pilots Ryan Graves and David Fravor on experiences relating to UFOs. Grush testified that he could not elaborate publicly on some aspects of his claims, but offered to provide further details to representatives in a sensitive, compartmented informational facility. So, like I was saying before, a lot of people think this is kind of fishy, and myself as well, I'm highly suspect of this. Now, why is that, do you ask? Now, also, I wanted to talk about also a lot of the occult aspects of all this alien UFO stuff, in that I don't necessarily believe that it's extraterrestrial, but I highly lean much towards this to be occult, demonic type stuff. And I can tell you why. I mean, of course, I'm open to the idea. It's possible that there's life forms on other planets, but I think there's much more evidence towards the occult side of things, the extra dimensional, more so than people from other planets. There's way more occult evidence. And one thing, what makes me say that? Well, here's a good example. There's this fellow, Louis Elizondo, who's also is a former intelligence officer with the Department of Defense. And he said that he was the director, I guess it's kind of a secret UFO program with the Pentagon, AATIP. But yeah, it's official. He was Pentagon intelligence officer. But he said that he was looking into all this stuff. He said a high up senior intelligence officer, whom he respected greatly, took him aside and said, "Yeah, Louis, I want you to stop looking into this stuff. Like, we know what it is. We know what this UFO stuff is about." And he thought, what could it be? Is it military? Is it from here? He said, no. He said, okay, well, what is it? And he said, well, have you read your Bible lately? And he said, well, I think I know what it says. And basically, he said, well, we know what it is, and it's demonic. And this is a man that Louis Elizondo, he greatly respected. And so I believe if we look to, we'll say, the scientists of old days, I think, and I'm not the best with my history, I think, what was it, around the Enlightenment period, when scientists really started to take a more materialistic approach, in that they didn't really believe in the supernatural and just kind of only wanted to look at what you could see in front of you. Whereas throughout, prior to that, the scientists, they believed in the supernatural. Much of it was alchemy and things like that. But it was only around that period that, if you ask me, it's irrational, because of all of history, civilizations have always believed in the supernatural the supernatural, whether it be monotheistic or polytheistic. It's only new ideas in the last couple hundred years, that this atheism idea came around that there's nothing. And if you ask me, it's irrational. And I think now more and more these days, more scientists are coming to the conclusion that, yeah, there must be some kind of intelligent designer. Science seems to be proving more and more that there must be a God of some sort out there. And if you look at mathematics and science, like it's almost irrational to say, something just came out of nothing. It's completely irrational, if you ask me. And even if, say, there are aliens on other planets, like some people say, oh, if it turns out there's aliens on other planets, like that disproves that there's a God, that disproves Christianity. And it's like, well, not really. Like, number one, in the Bible, it doesn't tell you every single animal underneath the sea. And so what? The Bible doesn't say that, so there's no God. And same thing with out there. And even if there are aliens, well, where did the aliens come from? Did they come out of nothing? So, if you see what I'm saying. But anyways, I digress. But prior to that, scientists generally looked to occult type stuff for their scientific advancement. Even Nikola Tesla, he said, like, in the early beginnings of his career, he was listening to good spirits, good angels that taught him a lot of this kind of stuff. But he admitted, he said, later in life, I started listening to bad spirits that would basically teach me how to make things that could be used for nefarious purposes, weapons and things like that. And if you look at in Genesis 3 in the Bible, there's that verse where it talked about the sons of God came down from heaven and mated with the women, and that they gave birth to giants. And this is where the men of fame and great renown came from. And a lot up through that interpretation is said, which I tend to believe is that was why God had to bring the flood, because man is created in the image of God. Like, that is what kind of separates us from the other animals. We have this divine substance within us, but it got corrupted with the fallen angels, and all of humanity became corrupted. And I guess Noah wasn't necessarily that he was necessarily super good or anything like that, but his DNA and his family were not corrupted by the fallen angels. So God kind of had to start all over to preserve our dignity as human beings, as being made in the image of God. And that's a interpretation that is often said nowadays, which I tend to believe. But that part from Genesis 3 was kind of mysterious, because there was so little. It was just those verses, and then it goes right on to the next thing. But then there's the book of Enoch, which is kind of an apocryphal book, and it's not considered part of the canon of scripture, but I think biblical scholars, they greatly respect it. And it's not garbage. They just don't think that it was divinely inspired perfectly by the Spirit of God. But I think one of the problems was it said, oh, Enoch was the Messiah, and they said, well, that can't be, because Jesus is the Messiah. And Enoch was one of the few people that was taken up to heaven, didn't just die, but was assumed into heaven, just like our Blessed Mother, the Virgin Mary. But if you look at the Old Testament, the word Messiah means anointed one. And so people like Moses and Joshua and King David and so on and so forth were kind of precursors to Christ. They're little anointed ones who guided the people of God as they looked forward to the coming of the promised Messiah, in whom Jesus fulfilled that and was the prophecy. So I don't necessarily think in that when it says anointed one, it necessarily meant like he is the Messiah. But either way, I think the Ethiopian Orthodox Church accepts the Book of Enoch as part of the canon of Scripture. But either way, I don't think anyone in the scholarly community discounts it as a bunch of rubbish. I think there's some historical relevance to it, and it was always revered in the Jewish communities, and I would imagine early Christian, but it just wasn't said this is the inerrant word of God. And that doesn't mean there's truth. But either way, I just babble on sometimes. But if you look, but the Book of Enoch goes deeper into those verses and what happened when those fallen angels came down to earth and mated with the women. And I'll read to you a bit from that. Okay, from chapter 7. And all the others together with them took unto themselves wives, and each chose for himself one. And they began to go in unto them, and to defile themselves with them. And they taught them charms, and enchantments, and the cutting of roots, and made them acquainted with plants. And they became pregnant, and they bare great giants, whose heights were 3,000 ells, who consumed all the acquisitions of men. And when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. And they began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish, and to devour one another's flesh and drink the blood. Then the earth laid accusation against the lawless ones. And Azazel taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates, and made them known to the metals of the earth and the art of working them, and bracelets and ornaments, and the use of antimony and the beautifying of the eyelids, and all kinds of costly stones, and all coloring tinctures. And there arose much godlessness, and they committed fornication, and they were led astray. Okay, sorry, I just lost my thought. Oh, and they became corrupt in all their ways. Samjaza taught enchantments and root cuttings. Arameros, the resolving of the enchantments. Baraquijel taught astrology. Kokabel, the constellations. Ezequiel, the knowledge of the clouds. Araquel, the signs of the earth. Shamsiel, the signs of the sun. And Sariel, the source of the moon, the course of the moon. And as men perished, they cried, and their cry went up to heaven. Now, you see there, basically he says, where did a lot of scientific advancement come from, including the making of weapons and swords and things like that? It was the fallen angels that came and taught them these secrets that, I suppose weren't necessarily meant to be revealed, or at least in that way. But so it tells you throughout history, scientific progress has been met through occult activity. Even you look at NASA, and there's a lot of the Nazi scientists who were brought over under Operation Paperclip, and Jack Parsons who wasn't a Nazi but was a devotee of Aleister Crowley, and he would do these occult rituals. I think he called it the Babylon Working, and this is where things like freaking nuclear bomb and the rockets came from. So my point is, I do think it's highly possible that number one, the CIA, well, through things, there's all kinds of different, Operation Stargate, there's MK Ultra. The CIA for a long time and the military has explored a lot this occult witchcraft, sorcery into their advancement, I guess. So it would not surprise me if this is going on and they have made some kind of contact with extra-dimensional entities which are teaching them scientific advancement, and they could be involved in making some kind of spacecraft that isn't necessarily taught from extraterrestrials but extra-dimensional beings, not from other planets but from the other spiritual realm. And we know, say, the Freemasons, which much of the US is so connected to Freemasonry. And if you look at the writings of the highest up and most revered Freemasons, for example, Albert Pike, they did say they were Luciferian, that Lucifer was their god. And it's not some weird, wacky thing that, kooky Christians say. It's a factual thing. That how is it that the highest up people seem to be bent towards this? Now, a lot of the people on the lower levels, a lot of them think that, they're, let's say, oh, I'm Christian and all that. But they don't see that Freemasonry is totally opposed to Christianity. And but I think the higher levels kind of think of these people as useful idiots. And I think if they can see that this person, if they move up higher into the ranks, will be willing to accept their God, if they don't see that within them, they'll probably stay on the lower ranks forever. But I'll tell you a little something here. The Freemasons, they call the people who aren't Freemasons the uninitiated. They said, which I don't know, could be any of us watching, call us the vile and profane. They think that they're enlightened, but honestly, their morality, it's disgusting. They're dishonest, deceptive, and honestly, they're kind of stupid. Their ideas are dumb. They're fools. So it makes me mad because they're really vile and profane, most disgusting type of human beings. These higher up type people on the planet, and frankly, they're just stupid. They think they're smart, but they're not. So, 100%. You've heard it here first. Okay. All right. Now that we got that straight. Yeah. Never trust a Freemason, okay? Trust me on that. Believe me. Okay. But anyways, I digress. But another thing I wanted to look at was the idea that this is all a psychological operation. This thing is bogus. This is something the military is doing either as a distraction or something like that. And I really think, I highly suspect that that is the case. I don't claim to have all the answers and know things for sure, but I highly suspect that. And I think it's pretty wise to be suspicious of these people, suspicious of your government put them up to scrutiny, because history has told us that many of these people aren't noble people and aren't trustworthy. Many of them are connected to secret societies and think tanks, which is honestly, it's disgusting ideas and nefarious objectives. Maybe some other time we can go deeper into that. But it's true. Like Freemasons, the Skull and Bones, like JFK, not too long before he was assassinated, he made that famous speech of talking about how infected this is into the government and the intelligence agencies and the military. And yeah, he called them abhorrent, and it is. The secret oaths, secret agendas have no place in government office, and honestly in a healthy society either. But anyways, what I'm getting at is apparently Wernher von Braun, who was one of the top guys of NASA, who was also brought in under the Operation Paperclip project when at the end of World War II, there was all these Nazi scientists, which also, by the way, was very connected to the occult, and that was apparently where much of their advancement came from. And they did take of occultic and satanic type rituals, and they wanted to get it down to a scientific method, which is where, for example, the whole MK Ultra thing came in. That was something they were perfecting. Ritualistic magic, rituals, basically satanic ritual abuses of how to break a person's mind down, to split it into multiple personalities to where they could be easily controlled. And a lot of it was through satanic or pagan ritual abuse ceremonies. But either way, when the war was ended, under the guise of saying, because I guess the Cold War was starting, and there's tensions, they said, well, the Soviet Union are taking these scientists. If they get these scientists, then they will be privy to this knowledge, and we need to win this Cold War. So we can't let them to get these ideas that they've came up with. So we will take them in too. And many of them, now they said that, people who Wernher von Braun, no, they weren't that bad, they weren't war criminals. But there is some evidence to show that that is not necessarily true. Credible evidence. But so they were brought in, and it wasn't known to the American people at the time. But yeah, many of them descend up to the ranks of NASA, and there's things like the MK Ultra and things like that. But apparently Wernher von Braun, on his deathbed, let's see, let me get to my notes here. See, I got this from the dollar store a little while ago. Ridiculously good ideas, so I could put my notes in here for these programs here I'm sharing with you. And but there was a lady who said, what was her name? Carol Rosen, who was a friend of Wernher von Braun. She said that at his deathbed, he confessed. He said, it's all a lie. It's all a lie. And he admitted that what the intelligence people, I guess, I don't know, military or whatever, but they were planning since the 1950s, but was to stage a fake alien invasion. And apparently it was a multi-generational plan. Like, it wasn't something that they are planning tomorrow. Like, this started in the 1950s, and they recognized that this would take time over generations, but there were different steps to be taken. And these steps were first through the dialectics of Cold War, and then next through the nations of concern, global terrorism, a war on terrorism, and then finally to say that there is a threat from outer space. And I guess would be a way to, and assuming declare martial law, and the idea was to usher in a globalist one world government. And but he admitted this on his deathbed, and that, yeah, he said it's all a lie. And yeah, you can look at things, for example, the war on terror. Now, I think most people do not trust, almost everybody. I think you have to be highly naive if you believe what the government told you, that there were no lies, that was right. Their explanations, like anybody with any bit of critical thinking or just eyes to see and ears to hear, can know that there are, what we're told, it's not straight up, and there's so much weird shady stuff about that, which again, maybe another episode I'll get more into that. But with that, the Patriot Act was introduced, which greatly expanded the government's ability to spy on and surveil American citizens, things that went against the Constitution and were the foundations of what that country was built upon. And if you can strike enough fear into people, people will gladly give up their rights. Heck, they'll be begging to give up their rights. Look at COVID-19, and we can look at the things that we're told that weren't true and went against statistics. If you look up the facts, there was tons of propaganda on that. So, but you see my point. If what is being said here is true, that this is these multi-generational plans, and that they would like to stage a fake alien invasion. And a lot of this I got from, there's a dude named Stephen Greer who was all big into this disclosure type thing, because he's all into this, and I guess he takes more of the extraterrestrial approach. He believes, the government is in contact with this stuff, but he thinks they're aliens from another planet, and frankly, I think he's wrong about that. I think a lot of his ideas are a little bit fruity, and the things that he talks about, basically saying, yeah, he's down for this global government and all this weird things. So I think a lot of what he says is tons of validity to it. I think he's very intelligent, but I don't necessarily agree with his conclusions of where it is. But even then, if he's so heavy into this UFOs, extraterrestrials, he at least is able to look at facts and say inconsistencies, that there's also government, it seems, lies going on, that they would be willing to fake this kind of stuff. And honestly, it sounds freaking insane. Am I going around saying, oh, watch out, you guys, it's going to be a crazy, watch out for the false flag alien invasion? No, I'm not that. Even with 9/11, I remember when that happened, I was younger, and there'd be these people, the Truth Movement, and I live in Vancouver area, but I remember in front of the art gallery, these people that come and they would have their shirts and saying 9/11 was a inside job, and it'd be like, yeah, dude, I think so too. I don't think it was straight up what was being said, but people are gonna think that you're nuts, wearing that shirt. It's a little bit but you know what I mean? But I'm sure these people, I don't know, I definitely open my mind to that. I do not doubt that these people are talking about this kind of thing. Whether or not they'll actually try to pull it off, we'll see. Unless they're completely insane. Yeah, that is one heck of a mission there. But I don't know. They've succeeded in many of these kinds of things. But either way, anytime I hear, say with what's going on now, like I'm suspicious in what are these people's intentions, because apparently it came out, I heard that NASA, they said that those TikTok, of the TikTok UFOs, I don't know, I'm sure many of you heard about those, that, was it the Navy or the Pentagon, the military released, or someone leaked. They said that no, it was, that stuff was manipulated footage, that it was sped up, and that it is, yeah, it's of Earth, it's military or whatever, human craft of some sort, but it would sped up. So if that is true, then that just goes to show you that there's some kind of weird agenda going on here, a weird psychological operation to somehow manipulate the public. And yeah, so I'm suspicious. If I ever hear about this alien invasion and go onto martial law, you better hide out, and all our sovereign countries would need to collapse our government and unify into a global government under the United Nations and listen to them, Charter of Rights and Freedoms and Constitution, all that is suspended. Like, I'll tell you, I'm gonna require a lot more evidence. I'm not gonna jump to believe it, and I'm gonna be highly suspicious. So, but going back to them apparently planning this, working on this since the 1950s. Look at things like, there was a movie, I think it came out in 1951 or 1953. It was a movie called The Day the Earth Stood Still. And that was a movie, I guess basically it was about UFO lands in Washington, D.C. So right in front of that phallic Masonic symbol, which tells you something about the Masons and all that in their occultism. But it was there, and they kind of and basically, I guess, it was to the world to defend against this alien attack needed to turn into a one world government and to unite against that. And if you remember, there was a speech from Ronald Reagan, I think, in front of the United Nations, and he said, if the world ever does come together as one, it could probably be if there was a invasion from another planet. And so I would say that. But either way, is this just a normal movie by some Hollywood writer, or is there some intelligence or military connections? And the answer is the latter. The script for this movie was written by Edmund H. North, who was a major in the U.S. Army Signal Corps. And he has been responsible for creating training films and also the patriotic war crime films such as Sink the Bismarck. And he won an Oscar for writing the screenplay for Patton. Like, you notice the training films, but this is a propaganda piece, basically, into that. But also, is that alone? Even more remarkable, Daryl Zanuck, the producer of the Day the Earth Stood Still, was also in the U.S. Army Signal Corps and was in charge of a unit that made documentary films. And Zanuck had been a board member of the National Committee for Free Europe, which had been established by the CIA in 1949. So if you see there, both the CIA and the military connections in the making of this film, in that perhaps, as Stephen Greer is saying, that they started plotting this in the 1950s to make this false flag alien invasion. And he says that they have all the technology, all the crafts and all that kind of secret weapons that they could very convincingly pull this off. But so they were planning this, and when did this film come out? Written by CIA and military connected these filmmakers, not just connected in the military, and part of an establishment created by the CIA, built up by the CIA. That's who made this film. So it seemed like way back going in the 1950s, a lot of this stuff put into film were the planting of the seeds of these ideas into the populace. And yeah, you even look at, like I was saying before, the MK Ultra and all this kind of thing, the stuff coming from the Nazi scientists brought into the United States through the intelligence agencies and the military, occult connected. What was the name? Madame Blavatsky. She seemed to believe that, I think, what was it, the Aryan root race or whatever, that basically, there was people from other planets and kind of were descendants from them, which honestly, her ideas is a lot what inspired the whole Aryan race thing that the Germans were into. And Aleister Crowley, there was that image, the drawing he made of that entity named Lamb, which people look at and is remarkably close to what the gray aliens look like. And I guess he opened a portal that allowed this entity to come in through his occultic workings, and he drew that image. So I don't think that this stuff is extraterrestrial, but it's interdimensional. I also believe, scientific progress both is divinely inspired, can come from God. God has taught man these things, but also there's the other side. There's the demonic realm, and to where demonic entities have been teaching man since the beginning of times. Things, revealing secrets that weren't necessarily meant to be revealed, and honestly help bring closer the destruction of mankind. So when I first wanted to make this episode here, I wasn't too sure if I should break it down into two parts or just looking both at the occult aspect of alien UFO type stuff, in that it's more closer to the interdimensional, extra dimensional, rather than extraterrestrial aliens from other planets. Or if I wanted to look at these psychological operations and the idea of, it's been said that the government is planning this stuff. I was thinking maybe doing two-part type thing, but I've got so much more notes here, but I'm going up on 45 minutes of talking here, so I kind of figured I'd do kind of a brief overview of both. And yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. And with that being said, I want to encourage you all to have critical thinking, to open your minds, always investigate, because I've learned, like, I used to trust mainstream media. I thought I was getting very informed and thought I could trust this kind of thing. But a few years ago, I don't know, yeah, maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, I found out that I was being lied to by them, and I was really angry. And so that trust was broken. And now I find any time that I do happen to see the news and I hear something and I think, wow, this narrative they're doing, that doesn't sound good. And but I bet there's more to than what they're telling me. And I'll tell you now, pretty much 10 times out of 10, I investigate deeper, and yeah, it wasn't the whole story. It's either an outright lie, or there's a kernel of truth to it, but it also being lied to by omission. It's not the whole story, and it gets so, that bit of truth gets so twisted out of reality that it no longer does represent that original truth. So, yeah, question everything, always investigate, always think critically. And that being said, that is the last page with Tim Page. All right, much love, signing out. Bye for now.